Good evening, everybody. Really nice to see you smiling, because you may not be by the end of the session. I can tell you one thing. Whenever I open my lecture on this particular topic and tell everybody that in Judaism we teach that anger is absolutely forbidden, which it is taught, everyone gets immediately angry with me. It's as if anger is one of your prized possessions, and how dare someone stand in the front and deprive you of what you have an absolute democratic right to express. If I want to be angry, I'll be angry, and how dare you tell me not to be? In which case, I wonder why you're all here. And the reason why you're all here is because I sense that you probably agree with me that it's undesirable. But I'm going to go one step further and say that it's not permitted under any circumstances. And then I'm going to say the next most radical statement: everybody can learn never to be angry. Okay? Big statement, eh? Does anyone have difficulty with that? I want to understand the difficulty. Someone who put up your hands, just tell me, what's the difficulty with that? You must be angry. Why? It's one of the unwritten laws of nature? What is that? Because it's very healing to be angry. Has anyone got any statistics that expressing anger is very good for you? No, I just want to know if anyone's read any stats. I'm ready to learn. Any statistics that tell us that anger is good for you? Have you had statistics that say anger is bad for you? Okay. Anyone else put up their hands who was somewhat surprised? Yes, please.
I wish I could control when someone else gets me angry. I can't control it. I get angry. And I hate that.
That's fine. You hate it. That's also not good. But, but I empathize with you. The gentleman said there's a difference between feeling angry and acting on it. Absolutely. I think both are no good, though. Yes. This lady, Pat, wants to ask me. Her name's Pat, yes.
I'm just skeptical.
That's all right.
As to whether it's an emotion that we can be void of.
Fine. That's why you've come here tonight, I think. Okay.
What did you say? That
She's skeptical. Yes. That we can be void of it. Peter.
We have anger in us, we have love in us.
Yeah.
The main thing that we should have is indifference.
Okay.
So I think we can go to both.
All right then. So I will try to prepare a lecture on your topic. Okay? Why indifference is not permitted in Judaism. But tonight I'm going to stick to this one. Only good things.
indifference makes me angry. Yes.
All right, so that'll be the lecture after that lecture. All right. Peter alluded to something which many people believe, and I'm going to underscore the word belief. They believe that you're born with anger. You're born with love. I didn't say you said it expressly. I'm just allowing it to be extrapolated. How many people feel that they're born with these emotions? You mean you're not born with love? You mean you only learn love and learn anger? I'm just raising questions at the moment because these are very basic questions. And here we are, each one of us, I guess the average age in the room is about 30. You've had about 30 years of life experience. And you'd think that by this stage you've worked it out, You've lived 30 years and you're not sure if you're born with anger or born with love or born with emotions, or are they imprinted on you by environment, or do they simply flow from your genetic makeup? Yes?
I believe we are all born with little nuggets of love and anger and everything else.
Good. Very good, Sav.
Parents are peers that bring it out and
Fine.
grow and flourish and sometimes also
I'm very, very impressed by your verb. You said, I believe that we are. There's a big difference between I believe and I know. How many people here know anything? Okay. So I've begun by simply trying to note to you, we're dealing with very fine aspects of self. Most of the things that we claim to know about ourselves or about the world are really beliefs that we hold. And that's why there's such a variety of views in the room, because if it was knowing, there would be a common knowing. And the very fact that it is a whole range of variety suggests to me that it's always a personal belief system. I'm going to propose to you today teachings that also draw on a belief system. It happens to be the Jewish spiritual system. Is it the only one in existence? Of course not. My purpose tonight is to share with you what Jewish spirituality teaches about the subject, for you to go away and compare to the way that you've looked at the subject to date, in the hope that I'll provide opportunity for those of you who are somewhat skeptical about the possibility of being able to eliminate and eradicate anger altogether, might walk away less skeptical, if not believers. Okay? So we'll begin with the following question. What does anger look like? Could people just share with me what they think anger looks like? Extreme passion.
Lack of control.
Lack of control. Yelling. Contracted. Frustration. The color black.
Red.
Red.
Ugly. Yeah.
Ugly. No one has yet proposed a positive word. Come on.
energy, release.
Neutral,
Catharsis.
energy, catharsis, release, bordering on positive. Okay. Defensive. Loud, threatening, accusative, disempowering, ugly, distorted, unbalanced, loony, selfish. Okay, we have consensus. And there's probably many, many more. Yes, we're going to get to the deeper aspect. Can you be angry on behalf of someone else, and can anger be unselfish? Good point. I'm going to come to that. The answer is no, but we're going to come to that. When do people become angry? What are the circumstances that cause people to express anger or feel anger?
When they don't get their way.
You don't get your way. Frustration breeds anger. Injustice. Again, low self-esteem.
So basically, when things don't happen that you believe they should happen.
When things don't work the way you want them to work.
When you are tired of
Mismatch
having it.
between expectation and reality.
Mismatch or gap between expectation and reality. When the ego is threatened. Okay? I think there's a common understanding that these terms all seem to express the nature of people when they become angry. When people are provoked, dismissed, not recognized, blocked, deprived, deflated, not obeyed, conflicted, cheated, put down. These things happen often. Does that mean that we are therefore prone to an environment that provokes us into anger, and therefore perhaps anger is excusable because we can blame the environment, the human environment, sometimes non-human environment? Question, rhetorical, not expecting an answer yet. What's the common denominator? Now we're getting to some tin tacks, and some of you have mentioned this. In every one of these instances, the ego is challenged. So I'm using the word ego in its rather vague contemporary sense, not in a Freudian sense or anything like that whatsoever. When the ego is challenged, in Hasidic terminology, that's called yeshus, me, I, when I'm challenged. Let's go back. When you're provoked, what does provocation mean? What's the nature of provocation? It makes you react, it's causing you to react, or it's intended to cause you to react, but still, what is it touching? We could metaphorically call it a nerve. It doesn't really touch a nerve.
Your emotions.
Yes, it touches your emotions, but you're expressing an emotion. If you look at all of these, somewhere it's affecting the inner self. Somewhere the self is being put down, deflated, or diminished. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. And we want to get rid of that discomfort by compensating for it. And the way we compensate for it is by building it up. And how do we build it up? We give it power. We give it voice. We give it mannerism. We give it behavior. So we arm it. Doesn't make it right, but that's what we do. And anger is the way that we compensate for our momentary deflation or low self-image or momentary low self-esteem, or what might be the case. When someone challenges you, when someone is rude to you, when you're walking on the street and someone very roughly bumps you, and it's clearly negligence, may not have been intentional. How do you feel in the moment? You recall such incidents. A momentary surge of anger arises, and you feel like you want to respond. Because that moment where you were dismissed by the other person as an item of significance hurt. When your child is being chutzpahdik to you, for those of you who may not be Jewish, who may not be familiar with the term, it means when the kid is naughty, cheeky, few more things. Clever also. Absolutely, yeah.
It's also defiant.
How do parents often respond? Not you, because you're very special parents, but how do parents often respond? They often respond, how dare you speak to me like that? Who do you think you are? Here, I've put in the best years of my life, and you speak to me like that? What are you doing when you say that? Are you winning friends and influencing people in your child? Definitely not. Are you teaching your child some positive lesson? Definitely not. What are you doing? It's got nothing to do with your child. Nothing, zero. It's got to do with you. Yeah? What are you doing? You're compensating for that momentary emptiness, that momentary lack of regard, lack of love, which deflates you, makes you momentarily empty. You have to fill yourself up, so you fill yourself up wrongly with anger. When someone cuts you off on the road, doesn't happen in Melbourne, because Melbourne's very, but in Tel Aviv, yeah. How do you feel in that moment? You know how you feel in that moment. And you feel like when you pull up at the red light next door to the driver, what do you do next? Yeah, you open the window, give the third finger sign, and what have you, etc. Why? Because you have to make yourself larger for the momentary limitation that the person disregarded you, so you feel less than what you believe yourself to be. And you have to make up for it, so you puff out your chest, you make loud noise, you gesture, and all this is to increase you beyond your skin. Compensation. But it's all artificial, and it's all for naught. So we have to look at this idea of what is the nature of ego? What is Yeshus? And I'm going to come to that because herein lies the key. If we can actually understand this dynamic, then we can begin a training program of response in order to make it much better. Here's my working definition of anger, therefore. Anger is an attempt to control or dominate the other or the environment in order to alleviate one's own fears and insecurities. Read that again. It's our poor coping mechanism to deal with our fears and insecurities. My child doesn't love me enough. The driver on the road didn't even bother and possibly put my life in danger. Whatever might be the circumstance, it's your own fears and insecurities that are being touched. And anger is the compensation, the artificial mechanism that we try to prove to ourselves that it's not so.
Doesn't make us look very good.
No, anger generally makes all of us look ugly, as someone said earlier. Anger is ugly. Our face becomes contorted, distorted. Our body shape changes. Our intentions are clearly ones of exercise of power. There is no redeeming virtue whatsoever. Is it ever justified? I think I've given a very clear answer there on the screen. So I'm being a bit provocative saying that, but I want to be a little bit provocative tonight in order to make us wake up to the fact that there is no justification for anger. The question which some of you posed quite correctly, but what do we do about it? Isn't it natural? Or maybe we're born with a capacity to be angry. How do we handle it? Yes, we're going to come to that as well. But at the moment, I wanted to establish that the teaching is that it's never, never justified.
For educational purposes,
Yeah.
anger, the rabbis have said, anger can be
Not in the Torah that I've learned.
well, it's the Torah, the same Torah that I've learned.
Well, then it's you versus me. And
Okay, I'll get you there.
I'm going to quote you in a moment and show you that's not the case.
It is.
But okay, we're going to see a quote from Rambam in a moment, Maimonides, that says, you can pretend, but you can't be. So it's not anger then. We'll see. Anger has to be or it's not. Yes?
There is one form of anger which probably has a different word in Hebrew, where you actually stand up against things that are wrong. For example, when terrorists kill people in Israel, it's correct, I think, for Israel to get angry, so to speak, and respond.
When you added the phrase, so to speak, I think that was the clue to what you're saying.
So what would you call that?
Look at the words in Hebrew. Za'am, Rogez, Charon Af, Ka'as. How come there are so many words in Hebrew that get translated in English in the one word anger, which they all are? And why are there so many different words in Hebrew, which is Lashon HaKodesh, which means it has to derive from the Torah? Short answer, translation is wrong. And I'm going to come to that. What's the word that's correct for anger, which we'll say is ka'as? And we'll see that the proper response to terrorism is never anger. In fact, when I lecture sometimes, in the United States, to sports coaches on motivation theory, inevitably, one of the coaches will say to me, I get the best out of my players by riling them up, by getting them really angry. I then posed to the individual 2 questions. Number 1, do you take responsibility for the way that the antics of your players become reflected in thousands, and with the media, hundreds of thousands and millions of youngsters? But more potently, number 2, you know full well that when people get angry, they lose clarity. And when a player loses clarity, he or she lets the team down. People don't play their best when they're angry, in fact. So what should be the substitute? That's what we're talking about tonight, and we will come to that. But the answer will be definitely not. The army of David HaMelech, King David, was the most disciplined, courageous, and successful military machine in the history of the Jewish people. Every single soldier was instructed never to get angry in the heat of battle. It gets in the way. As some of you heard me mention on Friday night, 2 of my sons served in the Israeli army, in the Tzava. Both were officers in commando units. Each one taught their platoon members, and in one case it was more than a platoon, never to get angry in the heat of battle. It gets in the way of effective soldiering. So what you said, I understand, but we're going to see that we have to be more didactic. And when you said, so to speak, I think you were quite correct. And we'll see what it is that we're actually speaking.
I have a question, and it's not to be provocative, but throughout Judaism, when you read, we're always told about a wrathful God and an angry God and a God that we should fear.
That's correct.
We misbehave.
That's
What
because
kind of anger is that?
that's a Christian anger. That's the way the Christians have defined us. They said the God of the Old Testament is the God of anger, and the God of the New Testament is the God of peace. And that's simply because they didn't know their Hebrew well enough.
No, I'm talking about...
No. I'm just saying why it comes out like that. And very often in our common discussion, we speak about, therefore, God's anger. So let me ask you a question. If your child is 3 years old, 4 years old, and you tell your child, don't go beyond the yard onto the street. Make sure you don't open the gate. And one day the child misbehaves and opens the gate. What do you as a parent do by way of response?
Strong ways.
The answer is consequences. If it's anger, it's going to blow up in your face. Why? Every child intuitively knows how to read parental eyes and face and know when the parent is saying it for the child's benefit or for their own benefit. Intuitively, because they don't have the intellect yet to be able to define it. And if a child receives an ongoing set of responses which are ego-centered, you didn't listen to me, I told you, and the anger rises, and it's all to do with the self, that anger is totally counterproductive, and there's no question in my mind it'll produce an angry child and therefore another angry adult. God gives consequences, never expresses anger. And I'm going to prove that to you in terms of our language, which will answer this lady's question and that gentleman's question very shortly. So I'm going to ask you to practice delayed gratification, and in a few moments we're going to get to the core of that one. Here it is, Maimonides' reduction of the law. Anger is an exceedingly bad passion. One should avoid it to the last extreme. One should train oneself not to be angry even for something that might justify anger. If he wishes to arouse fear in his children, He should make a show of anger. But in reality, his mind must be composed like someone who merely simulates it. The sage is therefore charged that anger should be avoided to such a degree that one should train oneself to be unmoved, even by things that would naturally provoke anger, and this is the good way. That's pretty an unequivocal statement. And it codifies the Talmud and the Jewish teaching all the way back to the Chumash itself, as I will show you in a moment. But there is an interesting little aside that you may have picked up from Rambam there. And he says, like someone who merely simulates, that there may be circumstances where you want to put it on for effect, maybe parent with child. I, however, caution you that even though the Rambam in his day permitted it, I strongly suggest that you don't use that exclusion clause. We live in an angry world, and our capacity to draw a distinction between artificial simulation for wise effects and actually getting angry is too thin a line today. And I think you'd be much better served not using that exclusion clause and pretending and feigning anger. And also because children will misinterpret it in today's time where they may not have misinterpreted it in Rambam's time. But the point here is the basic proposition. Anger is a bad passion, should not be expressed. So now let's understand, what are we talking about? We haven't defined our terms. We haven't said what is anger. I've asked you to look at what it looks like, what circumstances it might arise, but what is the essence of anger? What is it? Most broadly speaking, you'd probably respond to me correctly, it's an emotion. Anyone want to move sideways with that? Would everyone agree that it's an emotion? Okay, all right, it's an emotion. Are we not born with emotions? Therefore, isn't it inbuilt? Let's try to understand what emotions are, where they come from, and where anger fits into the scheme of emotions per se. Firstly, we have a very important teaching of the Alter Rebbe in terms of normalcy, or what is the correct way. The term is moach shalit al halev, that the mind must determine the outcome of emotions. The mind must determine the outcome of emotions. Now that can offend people, because some people will say, but hold on, are you suggesting that emotions should never be spontaneous? Are you removing the joie de vivre from people's lives? The spontaneity? The answer is no. I'm talking here in terms of training. And sometimes in training, you have to go back to basics and slowly redo, consciously, mindfully, slowly, the relationship of mind and emotion in order to get it right so that it can become spontaneous again, but correctly so rather than incorrectly so. So if the person has a very bad golf swing, what does the pro do? Takes him aside or her aside and starts from basics. The angle of the arm has to change. Your stance vis-a-vis the ball has to change. The way that you move the club vis-a-vis your shoulder has to change. All the little things have to go all the way back to the beginning. I want to take us back to the beginning. If you want to be able to change a negative emotion, you have to go back to the beginnings of that emotion and understand what is emotion and what is mind. Because in our Western society, we use the word mind and emotion almost interchangeably. Could someone here in the room please tell me what is emotion? Yes, have a shot.
Emotions are fluid energy that flows through you.
Fluid energy flows through you. I thought that might be blood or something like that.
All emotions, compared with the mind, which is more structured.
But are you being prose-like and poetic, do you really mean they're fluids, literally?
Yeah.
Do they have
Etheric.
size? Do they have
Yes.
properties?
Yes.
And what do anatomists call that then? Do
Anatomists
they see
haven't got
emotions under the microscope?
Anatomists, I don't think have the vocabulary for it yet, but most Eastern.
Do they see? I'm not worried about these. I'm saying you're saying it's a fluid. I'm asking whether you literally mean that.
Yes.
So it must be able to be seen under the microscope then.
No. It is fluid. It flows, but it's not material. It's energy. It's
So using the word fluid as a metaphor, be careful. Fluids in common language don't mean something ephemeral.
No, I mean fluid is and it flows. It's dynamic.
Good. Okay. So what is it that flows? Could you tell me what it is that flows? It's a feeling, but then all you've done is given me a simile. Tell me what is a feeling?
A reaction to
A reaction, do you mean nuclear, electrostatic, or mechanical? A mind reaction, what's the difference between mind and emotion then?
it's an emotive reaction.
It's an emotive, that's QED. You haven't told me what emotion is, so don't use the word emotive with me. It's a chemical in the brain. There are chemicals in the brain and we call those emotions? Don't think so. Although I hear what you're saying.
The
give it.
sensations or first impressions of the mind.
The first impressions of the mind. So it's not mind, but what an impression of the mind. So is it an extension of the mind then? Maybe a kiva?
No, it's a reception, it's a sensation, it's something that the mind...
It's a sensation of the mind.
It's a first impression as opposed to something that's considered and rational.
What part of the mind experiences it?
Soul, it's your animal soul.
Well, that's a neurological question, but in terms of its character, it's a first impression.
So, but just saying, you're telling me that there's a part of the mind that actually sensates as emotion. Okay? Instinct, is that the same as emotion?
Animal, it's your child in you. This one.
It's the child in you? It's the self that's big? Electrical impulses that flow through the body? I should be able to create a few electrodes and make it happen in my lab then? Okay. All right. Look, the short answer is, I think as the gentleman in the back said, we haven't got a good vocabulary in English. I'm going to introduce you to a Jewish spiritual vocabulary that allow us to speak about emotion. Because in the West, there isn't really an effective vocabulary. No one in this room, no one in all my years of lecturing has ever told me what an emotion is. Okay? So let's see if we can develop that notion. Emotion and mind together become expressed in the bigger term, which is even more contentious and even less susceptible to understanding, consciousness. I'm not going to go into the room and ask you to tell me what is consciousness, because if emotion was difficult, consciousness is that much more difficult, okay? But let's say simplistically, at this moment, for the purpose of our discussion, consciousness is mind plus emotion. Seems pretty all-embracing. Now, let's develop the vocabulary. In Kabbala and Hasidus, we understand that there are 4 parallel realms. They have names, Asi, Yitzir, Bria, and Atzilus. They all emanate from a source called Ein Sof. That's not going to be terribly important for us tonight, except just to know that, because it's going to help us understand the next slide. Through these realms flow what we would loosely call energies. Now, when the gentleman in the back, stop calling me gentleman, what's your name?
Tal.
Tal. When Tal said energies, he and I are simply using a convenient word. Today, everyone speaks about energies, like energies does everything. You heal with energies, and energies flow from energy and energy. The word energy is just a very, very generalized term that is able to service everything that we don't understand. Nevertheless, I'm going to use it as well. So there are 10 creative forces, loosely we can metaphorically call them energies, that flow from the source Ein Sof. They have names, as you see there. That's also not important for tonight, but if you were to study the nature of mind and nature of emotion, identifying these 10 would be very, very important. 3 of these, Chochmah, Bina, and Da'at, as they flow through the realms and ultimately come down to this realm here, the one in pink, which is the realm of time and space, or where you and I live consciously. This is the only world of consciousness. This is the only world of humanity. This is the only world of time and space. The realms above it have no time or space. Let's not go there at the moment. When those 3, Chochmah, Bina, and Da'at, flow through those realms, refract spiritually through those realms, and become expressed in our world of time and space, where we're seated right here on our chairs, those 3 become known as mind, or become expressed as mind. In other words, mind has 3 components in our spiritual teachings, and we would analyze those aspects. Not tonight. Chochmah is our creative facility that draws from our subconscious. Bina is our developmental facility that allows a thought process to evolve and spread and have dimension. And Da'at is the conclusive aspect. Where does that thought go to? What is its goal? What is its focus? And the completion of the thought process. Those 3 become known as Seichel, or mind. The other 7, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus, those 7 become our emotions down here. When they concretize into time and space, they become emotions. Each one is a different emotional aptitude. These aren't emotions in the Western sense of the word. These are the aptitudes for an emotion. So, just looking at the first 2, Chesed and Gevurah, by way of example, Chesed is our emotion that does this. Outward flow, sharing, giving, contributing from self outwards. Gevurah, the second one, is this. Holding within, withdrawing, condensing, inner focus. Neither of these 2 is good, and neither of these 2 is bad. They just are. We have this aptitude and this aptitude. How we balance these 2 in the moment can become good or bad, as I shall show you in a moment. At the moment, there are 2 amongst 7 aptitudes, and I'm not going to complicate the discussion by looking at the other 5. In passing, I just mentioned, they exist up here in no time and no space, but obviously we can't even begin to really talk about that. And this realm up here makes this one look concrete, and this one up there makes this one look very finite, so each one is a quantum leap removed. And yet these qualities of creation continue to flow in every moment of existence. It's called an ongoing creative process, of which ultimately you and I are the nth product of. We're the walking embodiment of these 7, these 10. But they also exist within the animal, they also exist within the plant, and they also exist within the stone, or the inanimate world. And obviously it's outside the scope of our discussion here to explain how they manifest. For that you have to go to Menachem's Monday night Kabbala classes, and you get a sense of what that's all about. All right, so we've got this far. I have now made your life very, very complex, and I apologize for that. But tonight, I'm not going to leave you with real answers, but I am going to demonstrate some of the complexity, and then at the end, I am going to give you advice on how to train to get rid of anger. I haven't lost sight of the purpose of the session. Now, when these 10 coalesce and flow through all these realms, it becomes known as the word soul, neshama, life force, the center of your being, your validity. There's many ways of looking at what it consists of. That's what we call soul. These 10 flowing through into your body, and the body becomes the mechanism for their articulation. Obviously, I'm jumping fairly quickly through all that. Now comes the important part, for our purpose tonight, not more important than the others, but for our purpose. What makes them good or bad? How do you become the architect, the designer of a positive feeling or a negative feeling? We could, although it's not our session tonight, of a positive thought and a negative thought. But we're talking about feelings tonight because we're talking about anger. Therefore, each one of us has a dual soul system. If I were to go back a few steps, here, these 10, as they flow through these realms, in this realm I've got them all flowing directly. The truth of the matter is, when they reach here, you and I mediate them into two possible channels. And that's what I'm now showing you on screen here. These two channels are called Nefesh Bahamit and Nefesh Elokit, or our animalistic nature, or more contemporary term, our selfish, egocentric nature, and Nefesh Elokit, our altruistic nature, or in religious terms, our godly nature. These two prisms allow all these 10 to flow through if we navigate them through our lower order self, our ego self. It becomes bad. I'm not scared of using the word bad. If we are able to direct them through Nefesh Elokit, our higher self, our altruistic self, they manifest as good. What is good or bad? I can give you many definitions, but the utilitarian one, which I'm using tonight, is anything which causes unity, oneness, and closeness is good. Anything which causes differentiation, dissension, separation is bad. That's the utilitarian definition for tonight. Good and bad are defined as putting together or spreading apart. When you get angry and express it, are you drawing the other one closer to you or pushing them away? It's obvious. That's why anger will fall into a Nefesh Bahamit behavior. Nefesh Bahamit, self-centered. Before we said that anger is egocentricity, therefore it fits very, very neatly within that particular box. All anger will be there. Love will be here. It's more complex because you can love people and that love can hurt rather than help. So we have to be more defined if we were to spend more time on the subject as such. The child says, give me, give me, give me, and the parent gives, 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 and the result of the child is spoiled, spoiled, spoiled. Very giving, very sharing, ostensibly putting it together, ostensibly love, and yet poor result. Because there's something not operating. Moach shalit al halev. The mind is not guiding the outcome of the emotion. Emotions do not possess direction. Emotions, as someone said before, emote. We have in contemporary times evolved a language term for that. It's called emotional intelligence, where the word mind in intelligence is alloyed to the word emotion, which is what the Alter Rebbe was saying, Moach shalit al halev. For an emotion to be good, it needs to be guided correctly by the mind as such. If it's guided sufficiently often, it can become a good habit. But many people have bad habits because they have expressed negatively for so long, for whatever reason, no blame here being attached. But because they've expressed through fear and insecurity, and it's come out negatively so often, it's become a habit. Tonight is not the night of discussing habit, but habit means when our neurotransmittic flow has churned out a channel so deep that the water of that emotion flows through it automatically, so to speak. And therefore we have to undo that channel. We have to make sure that the interrelationship in our brain of how the neurotransmitters flow is changed. That's hard. You have to change the direction of a huge ship. You know how long it takes to change one of the big ships, the change of direction from this way to that way? I'm told it's nearly 200-300 miles. It doesn't change very quickly if you want reverse directions. Likewise, what you've done habitually, unthinkingly in the mind to produce emotions that may not be so great. You want to change an emotion? You have to practice, practice, practice artificially in your personal lab. The changed response, learned by numbers, 1, 2, 3. And if you do that often enough, you create a new habit of emotion, one that you desire and want. The mind then defines the outcome of the emotion. So, what is the change of emotion? What do we call that? Mind and emotion, it's a shift. It's a paradigm shift. And I'm going to show you how you might look at the notion of an emotional paradigm shift. For example, it's a reinterpretation of reality. What your eyes look at is not necessarily what your eyes see. Think about it. What your eyes look at are not necessarily what your eyes see. What happens between looking and seeing? Answer, interpretation. When a person is yelling and threatening me, I immediately interpret that as something bad. Whether I'm trained to respond correctly or not is immaterial. I've interpreted that. That's a bad person. That person's trying to hurt me. Therefore, I have to defend myself. But more often than not, you never have to defend yourself because words can't hurt you unless you allow them to hurt you. Let's get to an understanding of interpretation. Have a look at this image on the screen. And without telling me, become aware of what your feelings are like as you focus on this image. Just to yourself. What about now? Has there been a slight shift in feelings? And if not yet, what about now? It's what we call reframing. Putting a new frame on the reality. You know full well that the way you frame a picture can either allow the picture to become much more of what it is or much less of what it is. Our interpretation is our frame. The person is yelling and screaming at you. What's your default response? Your default response is, how dare you speak to me like that? Who do you think you are? Let me share with you our reinterpretation, a new frame. They're yelling and screaming. That means they're in pain. Either emotional pain or physical pain, because people don't yell and scream unless there's pain of some kind. Therefore, what can I do to help them? Same features of sound. They're yelling and screaming at you. They're saying nasty things to you. They're attempting to hurt you. But are you asking whose problem it is? Most people own the problem, put it onto their back. It's me, it's about me, and if I have to defend myself. In almost all instances of people who misbehave, it's their problem. Now, you can be indifferent and walk away from it, but many people say, just walk away from it. That's better than yelling back, but that's not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is help them. You may not be able to help them, but your attempt to help them or more importantly for our purpose tonight, your thought pattern that produces empathic feelings neutralizes any potential anger. Get it? By reinterpreting, it can't be anger. Unless you don't reinterpret. If you don't reinterpret, then you're stuck where you were before. But if you can reinterpret and say, the reason that the yelling and screaming, I may not know the reason, but obviously they have a problem. What can I do to help them? Surely you'll feel differently when you go through that process of reasoning rather than the process of reasoning, they're out to get me and I better defend myself.
How can you be nice to someone who's screaming at you at that moment?
Why not? What's stopping you? Because society's taught you that? What's stopping you?
How can we help?
What's stopping you being a nice person?
Because the person part of it escapes.
So what? And you don't have the resilience to be a good person all along the way?
Can't always come.
Why? Why? Why?
They just have too much anger.
Why?
I don't know why.
That's right. You don't know why they have the anger and you're getting hooked into it?
How do you help them?
Really? But why? I'm going to show you a way not to, but I want to first get you to think, why do you get angry when people provoke you?
What if they really do have a problem?
That's fine, you're allowed to disagree. Anger doesn't mean, disagreement doesn't mean anger.
I can stop myself from yelling back. I can,
Good.
I can
Good?
keep quiet. I can keep listening.
Yeah.
But how can I stop that person
You can't.
angry with me?
You can't. You control no one in life. What makes you think that you control anything other than yourself? What gives you the right to even control someone else?
Not control.
Then what?
Attempting to help so
Oh?
they don't get into that state.
So what are you asking? Is there a way to do that?
Yes.
Of course there's a way to do that. We do that all the time, trying to help people.
How?
You come and have a session with Label and he teaches you, obviously. I'm going to give you some advice. I'm going to show you methodology.
Okay.
I'm going to conclude with that.
The automatic response, the amygdala, we have, when we're in a situation like that, beyond our control, we have this...
Then what do you do with Rambam?
Brain.
What do you do with Rambam then?
No, I'm just saying.
I'm asking you, is he wrong?
No, of course he's not wrong.
So how can you be right and him wrong?
No, that's...
So if we've got an amygdala, it's automatic. What happens?
I'm sorry, that's terrible.
So what happens?
No, and what I'm saying is, we have such a thing as the amygdala. We don't have control of it. Basically, we have this flight and fight.
But
response.
I know all this Western stuff. I don't buy it. I don't accept it. I don't follow it. It's not my model. It's not what I'm teaching today. It's not what I want to convey today. I know it's what you want, but it's not what I want. And I've got the microphone. I'm lucky. Okay. So, yes,
I can confirm
that.
what you are saying, that actually, well, it's very simple, it's my father. And I have learned to actually hear that the reason he gets angry is because he's not getting his way. I'm actually
Yeah.
hearing it.
Yeah.
And it's not that he's actually angry with me, he's angry with the situation.
And
That
that's,
things don't, so therefore it is possible
Yeah.
not to get angry back.
yes.
It
And
is possible
it's
to
a
get
good
back,
observation.
but then how do you actually help them to see the situation differently?
Excuse me?
That cannot be given in a one-liner. You have to know the personality of the individual. You have to know historically what causes them to express the way they do express, and then to develop the strategy. If you were to sit with me and I could get all that information, we could work out a strategy. My complaint is that most people never work out any strategies and simply continue the way they are in life. And that's what causes society to be the way it is.
If you are
1, 2, 3.
But as you're speaking, I'm thinking to myself, because when they get angry with us, we react in an angry way. If we react differently and stopped and said, and looked at them and thought to ourselves, they're angry for a reason and we don't give them that satisfaction, then the whole situation can change in a minute because they'll see that we're not responding.
It only needs one variable to change the dynamic. That's all it takes. And you are the one variable. Number two.
But if you are a compassionate person and
Yeah.
you do want to understand why this person is angry with
You may never understand.
No, but,
Yeah, but if you do,
try
yeah.
your best to
Yeah,
help
yeah,
them,
yeah.
and it's an ongoing
Thing,
reaction
yeah.
to everything. Isn't it better to sort of remove yourself from that situation
Sometimes
if you can't help them?
I look at the persons after some sessions and ask myself, what is their strength? And every person has different quotient of strength. Some people have the capacity to be able to withstand that and over a period of months alter and change it. Others people have and other people have very thin skin and they wouldn't survive the process. So you're quite right, it depends on the individual. But I'm talking just generally speaking, the principle is you kill them with kindness.
You don't try to find out their source of pain during the time of anger.
Not at that moment. Not at that moment. Probably wouldn't work. Yes, no, yes.
Even if something's bothering them, it's still not justified to go and let it out on everyone all the time.
You wouldn't say it's not justified, but it's a reality. Some people let it out all the time. And you've got to deal with that. I mean, you can't actually not face a reality. Some people live with angry people. In most instances, I found that they've never employed a strategy of change and they've never used an empathic approach. But there are people, notwithstanding, that life has taken such a toll on them that they will always express negatively and angrily. That means we have to become more refined as individuals to be able to cope with that effectively. All I'm saying is anger is not one of those coping mechanisms. Yeah.
So if you are the one working on yourself and
Yes.
you become more sympathetic,
Yes.
but the other person is not prepared to do any work on themselves, they just stay the way that
Yes.
they are, and they're not sort of
Look,
being
it's very, very difficult. I can tell you from my practice that I've yet to find the circumstance where we can't find the way to create change. I believe we can. What people often go through in married life or friendship life or otherwise is charades. The same lines are repeated, the same feelings arise, the same reinforcement takes place, no change takes place, or they give up after 2-3 times instead of waiting for 50 and 70 times. The question is, how much do they really want to see the other one improve? How much do they really want themselves to see change within themselves? And sometimes it takes endurance and it takes time. But I found with most people, there just isn't strategy. Okay, so let's have strategy. All I'm going to tell you in the remaining 5 minutes is how you can stop being angry in the moment. Okay? I'm not teaching you in the next 5 minutes how to change the other person. I'm teaching you in the next 5 minutes how to change yourself. And I repeat what I said earlier. You have no control over anything in life except yourself. You have no control over your children, and the quicker the parents discover that, the better parents they'll be. Control, exercise of power is doomed always to failure. Any circumstances where control has been exercised by power, whether interpersonal level or national level, is always results in the same response: mutiny and rebellion. And the children's rebellion might be one of removal emotionally or removal geographically. The husband's or wife's response might be the same, and same in national terms. So, thank you very much. Therefore, you don't begin with that proposition. You don't control anyone, ever. But you can control yourself. You are the variable. You can create the change. So step 1. You have to become aware that you're getting angry. Now, you think that's simple. That's the point that most people miss out on, and they are already in step 2 before they even know step 1. They've already opened their mouth and spoken. They've already caused damage. They haven't realized that they're getting angry. It's happened too quickly. It was a split second, and they're already yelling back. They're already waving their arms. Step 1 is terribly important. And you can learn step 1, how to identify the rise of anger. Many people have bodily symptoms that they can focus on to begin identifying and thereby slowing down the process of getting angry. For some people it's here, for some people it's here. It's many, many different possibilities. A much easier and better one is awareness. And that means really listening. I said before, there's a difference between looking and seeing. There's a difference between listening and hearing. Okay? So what you're going to do in step 1, which I'm not teaching you tonight, is how to become aware that anger is arising. You can't cope with it if you're not aware of it. But say you are. The other person's provoking and you're getting a sense, this is getting hard on me. Step 2. Ask yourself the following question. What is it that's causing the other person to say or do what they're saying or doing? You ask yourself this question. Yourself. What is it that's causing the other person to say or do what they're saying or doing? You do not have to have an answer to this question. In fact, it's very unlikely that you have an answer to this question ever. You really don't know what's going on in the other person's heart and mind. But you have to ask the question. Why is it so important to ask the question? Because, very close, you're taking the focus from feelings to mind. When you ask a question, it's an intellectual process. It's a mind process. If you allow the emotion processes to continue, they'll simply grow and, no doubt, in the wrong direction. You need to break the circuit. The only thing that can break the circuit of an emotional flow is the insertion of the other side of consciousness. Remember, it's a consciousness made up of 2 things, mind and emotion. You have to shift your focus from feelings to mind. How do you do that? Ask the question. By asking a question, you're allowing the mind to enter into the equation. But you have to ask the question with sincerity. You have to mean the question. You can't just say it like you daven Shachris. Sorry?
What if you ask someone else for help with the question?
That's, what I'm saying is, you happen to be in this situation right now. You haven't got time to run out to the next door neighbor and say, okay? You have to ask yourself the question in your mind. And what you're doing in that moment is turning off your emotions. When you focus on an intellectual question, when you're arousing seichel, at that moment, midos, the emotion momentarily stop in their tracks. Momentarily. Doesn't mean they won't resume. Momentarily. This is the... Sorry?
Is that when you start counting?
Counting is one way that people do it. There's many, many ways. I just find that asking that question is more powerful because it's getting closer to an empathic approach as opposed to an indifferent approach. Step 3. Don't answer the question, but focus on it with your full inquiring mind. So first you have to ask yourself the question. You have to hear yourself in your mind asking that question. It doesn't matter what the other person thinks. The other person may think you're really crazy. What are you doing? He's yelling and screaming at you, or she is, or saying nasty things. What are you doing? You're asking yourself a question. Okay, it doesn't matter what they think about you. The strategy is for you, not for the other person. I'm not teaching you how to change the other person here. That I cannot do in the context of this session. I said before, that requires a long-term strategy sometimes. But I am here providing you with your strategy, how you shouldn't express anger or even be angry. They're the 3 simple steps. I'll just go back again. They're awfully simple. Become aware of the anger rising with you. That's not so simple, but it can be trained. Ask yourself the question. Mentally, ask the question. Verbalize it. Don't look for an answer, but focus on it. The result is as follows. The words that will come out of your mouth then, your behavior then, will be radically different than if you allow your ordinary self, your lower order self, your animalistic self, your nefesh bahami self, to continue the way that habitually it's been allowing itself to operate. Any questions here? What you do lose is the satisfaction of fighting back. But that satisfaction is only egocentric. If you get satisfaction out of fighting back, know that what you're doing is making your ego stronger and stronger.
You're talking about being angry as a response to anger.
It's provocation, yeah.
But what if somebody's not provoking you? What if somebody's just
Then,
going
you don't,
about their
then there's even
business?
less reason for you to be angry.
They're just doing what they're doing, and it has nothing to do with you. They're
Fine.
just doing what they're doing, and it makes you furious.
Then you need to consult
What?
someone who can give you an answer. Why are you furious if they're going on with their business? There's something complex taking place within you. It may have nothing to do with this dynamic that we've spoken about at all. But yes, you need to have someone share with you some expertise as to why it is that you have those emotions at that time. Remember, we're talking about one very, very narrow aspect of our full range of emotional complexity within.
Just to point out, in that circumstance, you still ask this question, but the answer might be nothing. You're the one with the problem, that's it.
Okay. Anger is a choice. If you don't pander to your ego, and if you allow the nefesh elokit to rule over the nefesh behamit, the way that we said moach shalit al halev, then you will not express anger. Guaranteed. This question I'm not dealing with. I am providing you a momentary strategy. But when you have a momentary strategy, you break the circuit of anger. You never immediately go back to being angry straight afterwards. You don't. You've changed the climate. You've changed the ambience of your balance within. Therefore, it's rare that you'll go immediately back to a state of anger. But it will be that you'll be provoked again. So how do you allow yourself to become such an enlightened person that you are never subject to provocation? That's not awfully difficult. I know people here say, oh, that's impossible. It's not awfully difficult. It requires you to be able to adopt a philosophy of life which is radically different to the one that you hold. It's to do with emunah and bitachon, which I won't explain fully here. But emunah and bitachon means as follows. The word emunah means whatever has ever happened to you in your life is for your current good. All the angry people and provocative people in your life is for your current good. And bitachon is the way that you respond now will create a positive future for you. As I said, I'm not going to be explaining this aspect of a whole philosophy of life, but that's for the purpose of just demonstrating to you there is a way of looking at life in such a way that you never need to express anger ever. Now that's the completion of the pithy few words that I set out to set myself as a target this evening. So remember where we started off. We started off perhaps with a certain degree of skepticism in some instance, or even concern that maybe this is just a ridiculously impossible task or what have you. I've tried to concretize it and allow you to recognize that it's within reach, that everyone can, within reach, not express anger in the moment. One last thing. To that school of thought in psychology in the last few decades that has said that expression of anger is therapeutic. That if you don't get it out, it'll cause untold damage within. At least get hold of a broom and hit the bed 100 times and sublimate your anger. Now, finally, that school of thought that's been practiced and taught by any number of psychologists for 3 decades has been proven absolutely incorrect. We now know from our imaging technology, which allows us to peer into the brain as such, and be able to recognize that the brain is in a dynamic state of constant change. It's not a fixed item. That when we repeat something over and over again, as I said earlier, you actually make it happen more often and often. The more you express anger, so-called therapeutically, the more angry you will be. That is absolutely conclusive now. It's the field of neuroplasticity. You can look at it for yourself and recognize that unfortunately we've been taught a very incorrect teaching about the nature of expression of anger. And that's, I think, one of the reasons we've created an angry generation, or few generations, and why the world is such an angry place. That's simplistic. There are more reasons than that. But at least to put that one to bed. Any final questions or thoughts?
Could you just go back one slide and see if you
Which one slide?
that the mind will follow you?
This one?
Yes, please.
Okay. Speak now, forever hold your peace. 1, 2.
So when they say that you shouldn't swallow your anger, when you say,
Yes,
you know, the previous school of thought,
internal, yeah.
it wasn't meant, well, my interpretation was
Yes.
that it wasn't meant that you shouldn't express how you feel about someone's
Yes,
doing.
yes.
It's just how are you expressing that needs to change. You shouldn't swallow it. You shouldn't just always turn the other cheek.
I think
so to
neither.
speak.
I don't think it's good to swallow it. And I don't think it's good to tell the other person what it's all about.
But you can tell the other person, and you can tell the other person.
You can only tell the other person if your words are there to help them. You can't tell the other person if you just want to get it off your chest. Then that's self-serving. Yep.
Do you get angry?
My wife says I'm much better than I used to be. Any other personal questions? No.
So what's the best we can hope for?
Okay, so I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity of sharing an evening with me. Thank you. It's great to have you.